OpenAI have just announced a release of custom plugins for ChatGPT. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, if we come over to ChatGPT, we can see on the top here, we have our model. We can go onto here and click on plugins. And you can see now that we have this extra little drop down for plugins, and there is this Langchain docs plugin. Now, that's the plugin that I'm going to show you how to build in this video, but I just want to show you the other plugins as well. Okay, so you come to this plugin store, and there are basically a ton of these different plugins. These are the featured plugins. And yeah, there's quite a few there. But then you can also see at the bottom, you have develop your own plugin, install an unverified plugin, and so on. So you can actually develop your own. Now, what do they actually do? Well, if you've ever heard of agents, then this is a very similar concept. If not, no worries. I haven't really spoken about it before, so we'll just do a quick 101 on what an agent is. So an agent in the term of large language models, it's kind of like a tool, right? So imagine as a person, right, I have a complex math problem in front of me. I'm not just going to rely solely on my brain, which would kind of be the equivalent of a large language model in this case. I am probably going to get out a calculator or my phone, and I'm going to type in the calculation, right? I'm using a tool. Agents are kind of like the same thing, but for large language models, and they kind of do a very similar function. So you can get calculator agents. So large language models are typically not that good at performing complex calculations. So what you can do is tell the large language model, if you need to do a calculation, I want you to use this calculator tool. And to use this calculator tool, you need to write some text, which is going to be like 3 plus 4 to the power of 4.1. And we will take that text that you wrote, we will give it to the calculator, and it will respond back to you with the calculated answer. And then the large language model can relay that back to the user. Okay, so it's literally a large language model using a tool. That is what these plugins in ChatGPT seem to be, right? I don't know exactly how it's working because I've no idea. It's OpenAI. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any documentation on how this works, at least not yet. Maybe there will be some coming soon. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, it seems to be working very similar to an agent. So what can we do? I'm going to show you the Langchain docs plugin. So let me first disable it. And I'm going to default to my typical example of how do I use LLM chain in Langchain. Okay, and we're going to ask some more complicated questions later, but I just want to start with this one because it's relatively simple, but you don't need to understand it anyway. Okay. Now you can see here, as of my knowledge cutoff date, September 2021, Langchain is not a specific software library or package that I'm aware of. I'm not familiar with the term LLM chain. So on and so on. Basically, it's telling you, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, fine. But because Langchain is a new library, I'm not surprised by that whatsoever. So let's start a new chat. Let's enable the Langchain docs plugin, and let's ask the same question again. So what is the LLM chain in Langchain? All right, let's see what happens now. Okay, so it says using Langchain docs. Okay, Langchain is a Python library that facilitates the development of applications using large language models. How cool is that? Using LLM's isolations may not be sufficient for creating powerful applications. So on and so on. Introduces the concept of chains, chain LLMs together, so on and so on, right? So it's kind of describing what LLMs are, what these chains are in Langchain, and so on, right? And then it also gives you some links to documentation. So I can try and click this. All right, cool. Right, so I get directed straight to that. And we can also LLMs documentation. Okay, straight away, we get these sort of things. And if I go on to the next page from the previous one, we actually get this. So query an LLM with the LLM chain, right? So that's pretty cool, right? Now, how did we do that? Well, we did that with this plugin. And what I want to show you is how to actually build that and implement that yourself. So let's jump straight into that. So the first thing I'm going to start with is getting a template application or template plugin application. Now, for that, we're going to be going to the OpenAI ChatGPT Retrieval-plugin repo, which you can see here. Now, from there, what we want to do is go over and fork this repo so that you have your own version of this in your own GitHub. From there, once you have that, you navigate to your repository, then you click on code. You want to have clone here, you copy this, and then you want to head over to a terminal window. And what we're going to do is just git clone the repo that we just saw. Okay, so git clone ChatGPT Retrieval Plugin. Once we've done that, we should see that we have ChatGPT Retrieval Plugin. We navigate to that. Okay, so here we can see the directory. Essentially, all this plugin is going to be a Docker container where we are deploying an API that we will allow ChatGPT to interact with. So let's go through and try and understand what it is actually doing. Okay, so I've opened up the directory here. I want to mainly focus on what we have inside the server here. Okay, so we have the upsert and the query. Now, what these do is this here. So we have let's say we have our API, it's going to be here. Okay, so this is the plugin that we're working with at the moment, right? On this side, let's say this side is us, we have the upsert and we have query. Okay, those go into the API. They're our two endpoints that we're going to be interacting with. Okay, so here we have the API that we're going to be creating. Okay, it has this upsert and this query. Behind the API, there is going to be a vector database. Okay, this is a Pinecone component. We're also going to be taking our Langchain docs. So Langchain docs, and we're going to be giving our large language model access to those Langchain docs via this whole agent thing that we have going on here. Right, so there's a few components here. Then we also have ChatGPT down here. All right, let's just figure out how they all go together. GPT. All right, Langchain docs, Pinecone, ChatGPT API. What we are going to do is we're going to take all of our Langchain docs, we're going to run them through a Python notebook. Here, we're going to download them, and we're going to throw them into this upsert endpoint here. What that's going to do is it's going to come out on the other side. It's going to go to an OpenAI embedding model. So we can, how do we write that? I'm just going to put AI embed, right? And that is essentially converting the text in those Langchain docs into meaningful numerical representations of that information, okay? And they all get stored within our Pinecone vector database here, right? So this Pinecone vector database is now a potential source of information for ChatGPT down here. Okay, but we still haven't made that link yet. There's no link between ChatGPT and that vector database. That's where the query part comes in. So given a particular query, like the earlier example is, what is the LLM chain in Langchain? We'd ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT is going to come up here. It's going to think about it. And it's going to be like, I have no idea what that means. But I have some instructions that tell me if someone asks about Langchain, I should send that query over to this thing over here, this query endpoint. Okay, so then our API gets that question, what is the LLM chain in Langchain? It's going to bring it over here. It's actually also going to take it into that same AI embedding model, and it's going to get what we call a query vector. Okay, so this query vector here. This query vector then goes to Pinecone, and Pinecone says, okay, I've seen things that are similar to this before. Okay, in the Langchain docs that we embedded before, there are some documents that seem kind of similar. They mention the LLM chain, they mention Langchain and chains and all these sort of things. I'm going to return those to you. Okay, so it returns those documents. What we're going to do is return 5 of those at a time. Okay, so we then return those back. So through the API, we return those through the request, and they go back to ChatGPT. ChatGPT now has information from Pinecone. It has information from the Langchain docs. So it has its query, and it also has this extra information from up here, which we're going to call the context. And now it can actually answer the question. Okay, so then it gives that back to the user, the query in context, and just finishes, like completes the answer based on that new context that it has. So it now can actually answer questions. That is what we're building here, right? This plugin, this API here is what enables all of this, what enables the interaction between ChatGPT and the outside world. So the first thing that we need to do is make this API accessible. We need to deploy this API. So let's jump straight into that. So we are going to deploy it. I mean, obviously it depends on your own setup, but for the sake of simplicity, what we're going to do here is use DigitalOcean. So DigitalOcean, you have to sign up if you haven't used it before, otherwise log in. Once you have signed up, you should be able to make your way to something that looks like this. You might have to click on the side or click through a few pages in order to get to this. But what we can do is we want to come to here, and you can see an app that I've already created here. That is the app that I showed you before. We're going to just recreate a new one. Okay, and we can come down to here, and what we want to do is actually create a web app. So I'm going to click on create up here, apps. We're going to create a resource from source code. We're going to be using GitHub for this. You will probably need to authenticate, so to allow DigitalOcean to access your GitHub account. And then in your repo here, you're going to need to select the repo that you forked from OpenAI. So I've just selected ChatGPT Retrieval-plugin, branch main. The source directory is just a top level directory. We can auto deploy as well. So anytime we make a change to the main branch, it will just be redeployed. That's useful to have. Okay, so we have Dolphin app. I think that's just kind of like the app which will contain the plugin. Yeah, I think that all looks good. Right, and then we have environment variables. So this is where we do need to we need to add some things, right? So I'll explain these as we go through them. So there are 2 specific environment variables that we need to use these for the app in general, okay? And these are the bearer token and the OpenAI API key, okay? Both of those are required by the app. And then there are a few more environment variables that we need to specify that we're using using Pinecone as our retrieval component, which I will explain a little more later on, and to give us access to that. So we have data store, that is going to be Pinecone. We're going to need a Pinecone API key. We're going to need a Pinecone environment. And we're also going to need a Pinecone index. Okay, so Pinecone index, we can name this whatever we want. I'm going to explain this in a little more detail very soon. So I'm just going to call mine Langchain.plugin. Right, and then everything, or not quite everything. So the bearer token, this is a secret token that is going to be used by our plugin in order to authenticate incoming requests. Right, so we're going to include the bearer token within the headers of our API requests. OpenAI API key, that is so we can encode everything with an OpenAI embedding model. The data storage is saying that we'd like to use Pinecone, and again, I'll explain that in a little more detail. This will give us access to Pinecone. This will specify the Pinecone environment that we need to use, and this will specify the Pinecone index. If none of that makes sense, it's fine. I'm going to explain it as we go through that. For now, all I will do is just show you where you need to find each one of these items. So for the bearer token, as far as I know, you can just put anything you want in here. But the sort of standard practice that a lot of people go with is to use JSON Web Tokens, I think it's called. So JWT, JSON Web Tokens. And you just come down to here and you would put in something. So, I'm not super familiar with this, so I don't know what the best practice is to do here. All I'm going to do really is kind of make something up. So I'm just going to put in something like, okay, my name, it's going to be James Briggs or something, and I'm going to put in some other random things, right? And I'm just going to see what I get for the bearer token here. There is probably a best practice doing that, but I personally don't know it. Now, the other thing is your OpenAI API key. You need to get that from platform, openai.com. You go to your account in the top right, and then you can click View API Keys, and you just get your API key from there. Other things, the Pinecone API key, for that, you need to head on over to app.pinecone.io. Obviously, you may need to create an account, but everything is free, so you shouldn't need to pay anything, at least not if you're just creating a single index here. And you just come over to here, so API keys on the left. You have your environment here, which we need, so let's just copy that now, put that there. And then we also have in here our API key, so we will just copy that and then paste that in there as well. And then once you've added all of those, you would just press save. Okay, and you should have 6 environment variables there. So we click next. Okay, all it's good. You can change the region depending on what it is where you are, what you're wanting to do. And yeah, cool. All right, and then they'll come up with this monthly app cost. I believe this is predicted rather than specific, although I could be wrong there. But one thing that you should be aware of here is that you will hopefully get some free credits. So you can also use those. So you shouldn't need to pay anything, but don't quote me on that. So I'm going to create that resource. Okay, and then that will take some time to deploy. Okay, so our deployment is live now. So what we can do is begin adding data. So if we refer back to our earlier drawing here, you can see we have literally the first step is Langchain docs through this Python code to the upsert of the API so that it goes to Pinecone. That's what we now need to do. Okay, so we head over to Colab, and there is this notebook here. There'll be a link to this notebook so you can follow along, but we're not going to run through the whole thing. We are first just going to install any of the prerequisite libraries right now. That is just this, and there'll be another one a little bit later. Okay, and there's this whole preparing data stage. I don't want to go through all of this. I've actually included this in another video for which there will be a link somewhere in the top of the video right now. Or you can just kind of follow along with the notebook if you like to. But there's a lot going on there, so let's skip ahead And what we're going to do is directly load the data set, so the data set that we built from Hugging Face datasets. So to do that, we need to pip install datasets. We then load the dataset like so. Okay, and then we need to reformat this into the format that is required by the API component. Okay, so what does that format look like? It is somewhere in this notebook here. Okay, so we're going to have these three fields: ID, text, and metadata. The metadata is going to contain like additional information that we might need. The text is going to contain obviously the text, and then we have the unique IDs here, right? So we need to create that format. Let's have a look at what we have at the moment. Okay, so we have ID, text, and source. So it's very similar. We have ID and text, but now we need metadata. So if we just have a look at one of those items, maybe it'll make it clearer what we need to do. So ID, that's fine. These are unique IDs. The text, that's also fine. Problem is the source at the end here. So we need to put this, we basically need to just create a metadata dictionary and put this source inside that. So that is actually what we do here. We just rename source to URL, run that. Okay, and now we have the correct format that we need for our API. Okay, so we have ID and text like we did before, but now we have metadata, and then in there we have the URL and the link. Okay, cool. Now we're ready to move on to that indexing part, right? So because we're going to be interacting with our API, we do now need to include the bearer token. So this is basically how we authenticate that we are allowed to interact with this API. So that bearer token that you created earlier, you need to add it into here. Okay, so you just replace this bearer token here with your bearer token, or if you want to say it as an environment variable, you can use this part here. Okay, I've set that for mine. So then I'm going to move on to the headers, the authorization here, and bearer token. Right, so we're going to add this to our request so that it knows that we're authorized to actually use the API. And then here, we need to add in our endpoint URL. So this is for the previous one that I created. Now I need to update this to the new one, which is just here, right? So this Dolphin app, we can open it. So if I open this, we're going to come through to this page here where it just says detail not found. That's fine. That's kind of expected. So we copy that web page and we just paste it into there. Okay, cool. So what are we doing here? Let me walk you through that. So here we're setting up we're basically, what we could do, if I want to kind of explain this in the simplest way possible, is we could actually just remove all of this, pretend it isn't here, and we could just put requests.post like that, right? And that would post everything. So we'd be going through all of our documents in batches of 100, and we would be sending them to our API, right? The reason that we have this other part, this extra little bit here, is every now and again what we might see is we might see an error when we send our request, okay? And we don't want to just cancel everything if we see one error one time, because usually it's just like a brief error, and then you send the request again and it's going to be fine. That's what we're setting up here. We're saying we want to retry the request a total of 5 times. And what we want to do, so we don't overload, so we're not just sending request after request super quickly, we also have this back off factor. So it's going to wait like 1/10 of a second, then it's going to wait 1/5 of a second, then a second, then a few seconds, something like that. And then the status codes that we will do this for are all of these. So these are like internal server errors, right? That's all we're doing here. And then we're setting that up so that our post requests use this retry strategy. That's all that extra code is doing there. Okay, so we can go ahead and run that. And this is just going to send all of our documents, going to put them in the API. What we've done here, TQDM, so I just need to import that. So from tqdm.auto, import tqdm. Okay, so this is going to send all those documents to our API. Our API is going to send those to the OpenAI embedding model. So that is text embedding order 002. And then it's going to get those embeddings. Those embeddings are going to be then stored into the Pinecone vector database that we can then refer to at a later point when we're making our queries through the ChatGPT plugin. Okay, so I'm going to get a high latency here because I think my Colab environment is probably running somewhere in the US, and I kind of set this up to be in Singapore, which wasn't very intelligent on my part. So I'm going to go and wait for that, and we'll come back when it's ready. Okay, so that has just finished. What I ended up doing is switching to, I think I went to San Francisco in the end. Yeah, here. So I just created a new app, switched the location, and obviously it ran much quicker. So we got like 2 minutes there instead. Okay, that will also mean, hopefully, I would expect that this will mean it will run faster with ChatGPT as well. Okay, cool. So with that, we're ready to move on to querying. So this is basically what we are going to be implementing inside ChatGPT. Okay, so here are a few examples. We have our queries. We're going to have a query. What is the LLM chain in Langchain? How do I use Pinecone in Langchain? What is the difference between knowledge graph memory and buffer memory for conversational memory? All right, so if we run that, we should hopefully see that we get a 200 response. Cool. And then we can print out and we can see what is actually being returned here. So we see what is the LLM chain in Langchain, and we get like these documents from those web pages. Okay, so we have, these are increasing orders of complexity, LLMs and prompts. We have chains, and then another one is talking about chains again. How do I use Pinecone in Langchain? We actually get this really short, it almost feels sarcastic. It's just like, from Langchain vector stores import Pinecone. Yeah, that is true. We would hope for a little bit more information, but it works. So Pinecone contents, and then here it says this page covers how to use Pinecone ecosystem within Langchain. So that should hopefully give us a little more information. And then we come down to here. What's the difference between knowledge graph memory and buffer memory, conversational memory? And then we get conversation memory, graph memory contents, and it talks about the knowledge graph memory. And then I'm hoping at some point it might talk about buffer memory and so on and so on. So that all looks pretty good. Now, how do we integrate this into ChatGPT? So we'll just jump straight into ChatGPT, and we're going to try and add it as is without any modification. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to uninstall this one. So I'm going to go to my unverified plugins. I'm going to click uninstall. Okay, and to create our own plugin, we need to go to develop your own plugin. You say, my manifest is ready. It isn't, but let's say it is. Okay, please provide the domain of your website where the AI plugin JSON file is hosted. Okay, so for that, we just need to copy our web address here, and we place it in here. Okay, so find manifest file. And we're going to see, okay, there's some errors in our manifest. What does it say? Manifest API URL, yourapp.url.com. Okay, it says it is not under the root domain lobster app, so on and so on. Okay, and we can see all of this. So, okay, let's try and figure out what is actually going on there. Okay, so this here is we saw the main.py before. Right, this is our directory for our app. We go to this well-known, and we can see that we have this AI plugin.json, and in here we have all this information about our app. Right, so you can see here we have that default web address here. We need to fix that. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to put it in here. And there are also a few other things that we need to update. So we have the name for the model and name for the human. Okay, so name for the model is a name of this app that the model, ChatGPT, will see. So we're going to change this to Langchain docs.db database. And the name for the human will just be Langchain docs. right? And then the description for the model. Now, this is important. It is prompt engineering, right? This is the description that the model is going to use when deciding if to use this tool or not. Okay, so we need to specify when the model should use this tool. And when should it use this tool? Well, we should say, use this tool to get up-to-date information about the Langchain Python library. Okay. Now that is pretty explicit. We're saying when to use the tool. It's sometimes these tools can get used too much by the large language models. Okay, so I also just want to be super careful and say, do not use this tool if the user did not ask about Langchain. Okay, and that's it. That's all I want to put in there. As we'll see later on, this isn't the only information that ChatGPT gets about this tool, and we'll explain that soon. So the description for the human, what should this be? I want to say basically the same as what I said to the model, but a bit shorter and nicer. So I want to say up-to-date information about the Langchain Python library. That's it. Okay, so that should all be good. So we're going to save that, and I'm just going to come to the Git repo again, Git status. Okay, I'm going to add that. Okay, so the change we just made, and I'm just going to commit it to the repo. Okay, so now if we just go over to .wellknown AI plugin JSON, we can actually see the manifest file that we just spoke about. Okay, and we can see that at the moment it hasn't been updated. That's because it takes a little bit of time for this change to propagate through everything. And we can see here that it is building the servers again because I just pushed a new deployment. All right, so that is just going to take a moment to finish. So we'll just skip ahead to that. Okay, so the deployment has just gone live. So if we come to here, refresh, we should see those changes in there. Okay, looks good. Now let's try again with this. So we're going to try and refetch the manifest. Okay, the manifest has been validated now. Looks good. We can see you have Langchain docs, up-to-date information about the Langchain Python library. We have the OpenAI logo there. We can actually change that if we want to by just switching the logo that we can see here. But for this demo, it's fine. So click done. Okay, we click over here. We go to plugin store. We say install a unverified plugin. And this is where we need to take our URL again. We paste that into here, click find plugin. They're going to give us this little warning. And then we also need to enter your HTTP access token below. Now, this is going to be our bearer token that we created earlier. So we need to get that bearer token yet again. Okay, and then we can install the plugin. Okay, great. So that's now activated. So we can go ahead and we can say, what is the LLM chain in Langchain? And we're going to see this. Okay, could not pass OpenAI API spec for plugin. Okay, so we're seeing this kind of weird error. Now, as far as I can tell, this is just an issue with the current version of the OpenAI spec that is currently being used. So we're just going to go in and fix that. Okay, so we have openapi.yaml here. We go into here first. Okay, straight away we can see, okay, the URL is incorrect, right? But as far as I can tell, there are a few other issues with this. So I'm just going to go in and we're going to fix those. Okay, so I've just copy and pasted this new openapi.yaml in. This one works for me. There'll be a link to this in the video in the top right now, in case you find that the previous one also doesn't work for you. You can just use this one. So there are a few things that we should change here, like the URL, the description, and so on. Okay, so we're going to say this API lets you search through the Langchain Python library documentation. We should call it retrieval plugin. No, I don't think we should call it, or is it Langchain docs API maybe? And for the URL should be the one that we used before. So we actually have it in the AI plugin. So we're just going to take this and we're going to put it here. Okay, cool. So I tested this a little bit, and it seems that ChatGPT is actually also reading this openapi.yaml, and it seems to be using that in order to inform how it's creating the queries to this. If you're having problems with the query, you should update it so that it knows what sort of format it should be using. Okay, so there's one thing that I would like to update here, which is this description. Okay, it's quite long at the moment, so I'm just going to shorten it a little. So I'm saying this is the description that is kind of telling it how to use a query request. And we just say this is an array of search query objects, each containing a natural language query string query and an optional metadata filter if you'd like to include that. And it describes how to use the filters and so on, right? Okay, that should be all we need. So I'm going to make those changes. So git status, git add. And this is just update the OpenAPI YAML. And then we just push that. Okay, so that is going to be building again. We'll wait for it to deploy. And we can also check over here for the YAML file. So it's OpenAPI YAML. Okay, and we can see that we still have the old version there. So this, we'll just wait a moment, it will update soon. Okay, once it's deployed, we can refresh this page. Everything will be there now. And okay, so let's use what is the LLM chain in Langchain. We're going to start with this one. Here, we need to make sure we're using the plugins, make sure our plugin is active over here, and search. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is more specifically talking about chains in general. So we can probably modify this to try and return more items, but for now we'll leave it there. And let's just try and ask, how do I use Pinecone in Langchain? See what this comes up with. In Langchain, use Pinecone as a vector store for tasks such as semantic search or example selection. That's kind of cool. They got both of those. To use Pinecone in Langchain, you need to install Pinecone Python SDK and import it from here. So install Pinecone client from this, use this. Okay, it looks pretty good. We can also click here for the Pinecone documentation, which also takes us through a little bit more. But I want to ask one more question, so new chat. And I'm going to say, what is the difference between knowledge graph memory and buffer memory for conversational memory? In Langchain, we should specify. Okay, let's see. This is a hard question. I'm not really expecting too much here, but we can see. Okay, different types of memory, two of which are conversation knowledge graph memory and conversation buffer memory. Okay, let it generate, and then I'll come back to it. Okay, conversational knowledge graph memory uses knowledge graph to recreate memory. You know, it's actually a pretty good summary. For example, if the user says, say hi to Sam, and then ask who is Sam, the user can use the knowledge graph to remember that Sam is a friend. Okay, that's kind of cool. Conversational buffer memory keeps track of a sequence of chat messages. Okay, that seems pretty good. In summary, conversation knowledge graph memory uses a knowledge graph to structure and organize information from the conversation, while conversation buffer memory maintains a sequence of chat messages for short-term memory. Both types of memory are used to provide context-aware responses based on previous interactions with the user. I think that's all actually pretty accurate, and I'm kind of surprised it got that to that degree. That isn't too bad at all. Okay, So that's it for this video exploring the new plugins for ChatGPT. There's quite a lot to cover there, to be honest. It's not a super straightforward process because obviously there's a lot of different components to this that we need to consider. But that being said, given what you can do with this, I think it's actually not as complicated as you might expect. So I think particularly as people get more used to ChatGPT plugins, like it's brand new, so there's obviously going to be some things that need ironing out and best practices that need figuring out and so on. But I think once people get a little more used to it, this sort of thing will become a lot more natural, especially for people that are kind of developing these things all the time. So anyway, that's it for this video. I hope all of this has been interesting and useful. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye.